4. Okay, this session is called the hip settler. So what you're going to pose your bones into a shape of, so that your seat is on the lurking on the edge of your bolster, which is spine wise, it's going to be lengthwise on your mat. If you feel like you are right up against a knee kind of squat position, that's correct. Of course, we're going to stretch our legs forward on the blanket. So I propose that you push the blanket out, your rolled up blanket, a little bit forward of your toes. You have a blanket at the back, very flat and wide, and a belt behind that. That's in a loop of double, so it's looped up, so it's a double reinforcement. And then as you recline, if you are too far back on the bolster, as you go back, it's more challenging to reset. So it's better off that you're at the edge of the bolster. Remember how we go back to Viparita Karani with our seat at the edge and we kind of drop back? It's similar to that you want to be farther forward. And then when you guide and glide the spine's weight, we're focusing on actually letting the weight of our bones in our upper body traverse back. So it's a little awkward. You want to get your head on the blanket, but you really want to poof up the ribs. It's like if you can imagine that you are able to hold your ribs at the back of you, and then they kind of open like they're petals. That's kind of a good expression of them. It's like they're pedaling. So if the back is feeling a little bit of the scrunching, this work today we're doing is also real strengthening work for our hips. And so when I reach my feet down on the blanket, it may feel good in the beginning. It may be too much to start with your legs straight down. So if your back is taking some time to be settled and release, then you can start with your knees bending for about a minute or so. Of course, you could stay with them bending. Now, as soon as you orient your ribs to that pedaling pattern, open petals, you'll place a sandbag either on the tops of the thighs or on the ribs. I like the idea of the thighs. And even though I'm not using belts on my legs for this one, this gives me a little freedom to put my feet wider. And of course, if the feet widen, it doesn't mean that your back is going to have a lighter pressure. That's not the truth of the sacrum space. So get a feel of the openness of the chest and start to wander back so that the elbows and the muscles that are from your chest out into the elbows, there's a lot of muscles in those spans, can practice settling. This is purely a practice of settling into shapes that promote wellness. So it requires patience and breath. Let the feet feel like they can turn out to begin. So they're relaxed, they're not forcefully pulling the toes up. They just experience releasing. And then I encourage you to get a hold of that belt and be mild at your pressure grasping it, but have some curiosity of spreading the hands out wide on the belt, and then feel that association of holding the belt and the circulation that's in the walls of the chest. Let the eyes rest if that's comfortable for you, so that you can sense that the actual eyes themselves are perfectly set into the skull. It has a place for your eyes to set back into. Rather amazing. And the eyes can set back in those pools that hold them, and the weight of the skull, but also the weights of your muscles settle down. Breathing in slow through the nose, out through the mouth. Feel how the belly has an experience of circulation. Maybe it's not really fluid for you. Sometimes this is a very taut, pulled position for the stomach. It's very tone, so that your impulse to try to get the abdomen to rise is likely stressful. So just let your body settle and release. Let's take a few more moments. If there's places that are not tolerating this shape, like your back musculature, then change the position of the legs. Let the knees bend. Put the sand maybe on your ribs or your belly. And those of us that have the legs straight down, get a feel of the weight of the back of the knees. And maybe the feet having a mild rotation makes that easier on the knees for this position. Okay, now we're using this belt not as a particular pressure for the joints. I want you to use this as kind of it's an equalizer, right, for the side. So sometimes a prop gives you something to reference the right and the left side and how the balance is. And there's a lot of poses we do that have pushing in them and not a lot of pulling. So that's what I kind of like to do with the belt sometimes, is having the energetic intensity of pulling, but breathing as such that you can still trick it to soothe the nervous system, right? Actions of pulling are sometimes tensifying. So feel if you can find some ease even when you're pulling something. Use your breath, use your mind into your breath. And then let go of the belt. Feel the arms position as wide as they can relax into the elbows. And you might get a sense of your feet now beginning to come back towards maybe the feet, so the feet flex, the toes have more directional upwards with the heel to the toes. Your nose is up too, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, now position change into Baddha Konasana. Interesting variation with the sand. So we shed the sand, and as the arms have that continuous, positive balance for the upper body, you want to find this upper body as your balancing point. And then as you slide your feet in, so your knees kind of poke up, they lift. And then as the knees are up, notice that the knees kind of have a pointedness to them. And the key for the cobbler's pose is that the knees point out. So we're going to step up on that very base of your bolster, right? You put your feet up onto that base, and then slide the feet so they go sole to sole and the knees point out. Let's say this doesn't work for you with your alignment, you're long, this isn't quite how it sorts out for you. Scoot back so your shoulders kind of shuffle down to the ground. This feels better on my shoulders and farther back. And then it feels like I have this, these kind of wings of the shoulders motioning open, and that wingspan kind of holds my back into a brace, and the knees are spanning outwards. And of course, there's always a lot of fidgeting to get your feet close-ish to your pelvic floor. But if it doesn't work out for you with your knees on this position, you're certainly okay with letting your feet be on the floor, your knees point out, that's okay. So it's kind of a semi Baddha Konasana. So feeling the circulation dynamic in the inner thighs. Okay, and we might as well also pull into the pattern of pressing with our feet. And then we're going to do several inverted patterns today. So when you move your knees to point up, see if you can align your lungs to get your feet up, and maybe your knees are just simply lifted, your feet off of the bolster and the floor. Door one would be here, door two would be legs up, no sand. And if you're feeling a little bit off balance, you're going to fall off. Do the work with squeezing the legs together from the inner lining, right? Versus we're not trying to roll them to the hamstrings, but get a feel of that inner line, the inner bone touch, and the feet neutral so they're not flexing. And the arms stretch straight back, so you're reaching through the limbs. Full motion with legs up, arms back. And the energetic with the extremities is pretty different, right? Because your core has to manage this control of both upper and lower body. You can do a lot of good, right, for your hip settling, because this class is called Hip Settler, for your hip and your pelvis and your low back when you do work on your back. Anything but sitting will be helpful for your inner, right, your pelvic floor and your organs, reversing the flow of gravity. So this is a very short legs up pattern, and let the knees bend. Now that position of the bolster this way is a little bit challenging for your back muscles to spread out. So now we're going to take that stretch open of the back muscles to the pelvis. So I want you to put your feet down besides the bolster so they're on the floor. And then when you push into your feet, use the muscles, the hamstrings. It's tricky to figure out how to ignite those right here, because your glutes will likely max out. Your glute max will max out. So I want you to particularly feel when you push down to your feet and you lift up your rear off the bolster. You can't lift it very high. And you're going to reach for the bolster and then turn it. So where it is under you is now across. And I would kind of slide down so that my pelvis, as you know it, is on the bolster. It feels like it's pretty high in the back of the pelvis so that a couple of your lumbar vertebrae are on the bolster, okay? So now get a hold of your positioning here with your knees coming back up. And if you're kind of a little bit lost with it, what we basically have is our bolster horizontal underneath us, however you find a way to get there. And as you get your belt, you'll use the whole width of it this time. You're going to slip the belt underneath your feet. It's got to be on your feet for this one. And then span the feet out wide. Okay, so I think we can see this pattern. So with the feet pushing out, it's the pushing out position. So the hamstring band is likely, I don't know if you sense that it's a stretch or there's kind of this dull pulse through this inner leg. And maybe you feel like, oh, kind of front of the hip bones, the belly, this area can start to land into a little bit more comfort. So let the feet, they could kind of shift a little bit, the balance, but notice how the knees might turn inward. So you want to get a feeling of a pretty perfect V shape with the leg. And the arms are going to either stretch straight back or they're open to the sides. So let's take just about 45 seconds or so with this pattern and feeling that there's neither a direct relationship with the tailbone, but it's like this spanning shape. Okay, and you get to decide how your arms want to be. Maybe it's cactus. Maybe you can't stand to be without your sandbag and you want it on your belly. You can add it anytime. How often do you get to relate to your sandbag anyway, huh? In yoga. Okay. Now, naturally, the feet conform to the belt a little bit. The bones, for most of us, don't get shoved in, but you likely can feel your feet conform to what they're in quite often, right? Like shoes, they conform to that. And they create habits up into your pelvis and your back, spine. So we're going to work with that whole idea of using this belt and conforming with it. So bend through the knees and try to let your feet kind of feel like they push out. Of course, they're flexed, so you're not like turning your foot out. So your feet are flexed, so the soles are towards the ceiling, and you're pushing out. Now, if your knees are going, oh, I feel that in the side of my knee, or you're feeling it medial, right in the knee, then I want you to let the feet move a little bit back so they're not as far forward, right? And a little bit back. Now, bend the knees if you can, a little bit more, and hold on to the belt, and you're going to slide your feet together. It's more of a movement exploration. Now, reach your hands up as close as they can naturally grasp onto the belt towards your feet without you lifting your head off of the floor. And lower down through that left leg. And we're going to keep that conforming pattern and take brain float. We all know this pose. So you'll motion so that you have your belt buckled up. And I like to have the tail of the belt where I can reach for it and it can go downwards to make it tighter or looser, that kind of thing. That may not be the biggest deal. But when you hold on to it, give yourself plenty of traction for your neck, so wide loop. So when I lift up my head and I place the belt to the occiput, it is the shelf at the back of your skull here. And you want to feel that shelving. As funny as that sounds, your brain shelf. Feel that it does kind of scoop it up and it holds it. It kind of nestles into that shard at the back of your head. Now, if the hamstring is not feeling much circulation, then I advise you, just advising you, to make the belt either a little bit shorter, or you're going to add on your sand to your left thigh. Now, sand alone will make the sensation grow in the right leg because that opposite thigh is being pressed down. It would be similar to if you were in a training session and there was a foot on this leg and the other leg was getting pulled back, right? Pushed with hands. So that's a typical training technique. But we just use it we use our sand. So it's kind of, you can adjust it how you want. You don't have to deal with a person with that situation. It's you and your sand. And then if you find, oh, there's something lurking where I'm not quite settled, then take your time. Maybe you hold the back of your skull and you guide your head back. So for me, I'm pretty close to my blanket. I could touch it, but I'm going to keep that traction in the neck. Yeah, this pose can feel different each time with some little particles of shifting in the calves. If you kind of play around with how your foot is responding to the belt, it could feel like it's going to slip off. So you might have to reset it towards your heel. But let your head shift back. You could pull the belt a little higher on the back of your skull. It's all up to you. Now, before you get out of this side, I want you to spend some moments on the relationship of the foot in the belt, that it's pushing a little bit up, right? And maybe that to you means it pushes away, so it could feel like it pushes forward a little bit. But I want you to feel that your leg is very powerful. You can feel all the muscular intensities, but the neck, when it's getting that mild stretch, has a very different pull than a hamstring. Well, I hope it does. You feel traction. Now play with the shift. So move the sand and lift up the left foot. Take your hands to the back of your skull to hold the belt on, and then shift the right leg down. The left foot is up in the belt. recall that your first side, maybe you had more length, right, with your belt. So you can always adapt. And each hamstring and each calf has a different balance or a response in your kinesthetic curiosity is kind of how I think of it. But it might even be that your knee pulls in a little more on one leg. And so taking a gaze at your leg is kind of interesting. Makes me want to get the other one up and compare. But if you tend to hyperextend on one leg more than the other, this will come up on this position. Putting on your sand. Putting on that lovely sandbag to the other side. And, I suppose that we're supposing, that's what we do, is we suppose. If it's harsh feeling in your hamstring, you certainly might find that loosening the belt doesn't always fix that. It might be bending the knee a little bit. It might be a balance of things that takes away the intensity. But we are going to let the arms move open at some point here. If your sand is kind of falling off, you can always turn the sandbag across the top of the right thigh or lengthwise down. And if you're noticing your breath, it can be a little challenged in this pose. Right, there's a pull in the lungs, right? Your upper back has a lot of your lung force. So there is some intensity here. So control your breath. Sometimes you can control your breath. So feeling the awareness of the abdomen expand and relax. Feel that pure length of the back of the left leg. And maybe it doesn't feel like it's pure length, but it's purely tense. Nothing peaceful sometimes about it. But when that reaction is in your awareness in the leg, where that's your peak sensation, continue with that steady breath. And let the weight of your head shift back. If it's too much chin tucking, that you feel like it's pushing down and it's not helpful for you to calm, then you want to let your head be supported by that belt and maybe give a little touch to the back of your head so the belt stays on, and feel your head release back. I want you to feel the back of the left leg. Okay, now slide the sand away and reach your hands to the sides of your head, hold the belt, that is, and slide the belt up and up. So you're holding the belt now, and let's get a hold of it with the right hand. Okay, so left leg is up. If you're on the opposite side, you want to be opposite hand away. And you'll get a feel that when you cross the top leg over, for us, I'll reference the left leg. You'll cross the top leg to the right and feel that felt sense of gliding from the hamstring to the outer tubing of the leg. If you kind of use the practice, since it's a lot of dropping into your experience, that you can, analyze some of these reactive states of your muscles. And they could still feel like, oh, this is a real intense stretch. So if you can let the leg kind of be supported by the belt and the bolster under you. And then if you need to bend your knee a little bit, just simply bend the left knee. But feel when you hold onto the belt. And then feel that your shoulders are back and the left arm is open. And for most of us, this is a little challenge, is keeping the shoulders down. But if that's not your challenge any longer, then maybe you explore what could be challenging, or maybe you would rather pretend there isn't any. But the challenging pattern is to find that equilibrium in your upper zone, heart, ribs, and even the belly. And then it dissects from the below the abdomen is when it crosses. So that's what I want you to notice is that the mid spine is starting to get a little pulled and stretched. Okay, so bend through that left knee. And then as you lift up the left foot, we're going to swap the foot in the belt and simply right foot is up, left leg is down. Maybe you're on that blanket still below you. Perfect. Or the bolster. And then hold onto the belt with your left hand. And when you do cross over, feel the pre-intensity, like, okay, maybe you have a little hamstring flow right now. But then when it crosses, notice when it slants over to activate the side of the hip. Maybe you feel this in your rear. Maybe you're pulling so much that everything's on lit up in the leg. So I would work on the higher band of the muscle, like right at the root, the pelvis attachment to the hip. And then work on that strength. Okay, so some of us experience in the practice some settling, some opening, releasings. But today I want you to work on some of the strength we can get out of the poses. So all the way into the bone. So you are pushing into the belt with your leg a little bit, right? Your foot. But you use the body weight, the leg weight into the belt. And then feel the resistance holding onto it. And just let the body weight help the stretch. You can force it and push it and get tense if you want to with your face and grit through it, but feel that glide of the leg, how it stretches out the right side of the pelvis into the right side of the spine. So we're trying to get the spine to lengthen. That's my hope. Open out the right arm. Let your head roll to the right if you like. And enjoy that next breath. I'm sure there's areas that you notice can let go, even your eyes. And kind of soak into that circulation balance. If you like to kind of massage into your right hip, or maybe just letting the body weight stretch it. Give a few more patient moments. Right knee bends. Okay, now when we guide the leg back in, we're going to go into Viparita Karani. So that's sandy feet. So we got no belt prizes here. We got a sandbag. Okay, we got the knees pointing up. And sometimes you push your bolster down so far with your body weight, you feel like, am I on the other side of the bolster? So be sure that your seat is still on the bolster. And it's like we practice, spine length work is what we do with these bolsters under just your one bolster under you. But when you are moving your knees towards you and then squeezing in so the sand goes on the feet, you want to feel where there is like the feet are apart, but they're not so far apart that when you lift up the legs, you lose your sand between them, right? So you do have to find maybe a couple experiences of doing this lifting of your sand until you find that the coordination of your feet flexing is magnified. So now really work with that sensation of flexing. Right. Once you feel that, you can kind of lighten it up. Maybe your feet go kind of to a in between neutral and flexing. Okay, and my feet, I'm letting them slightly turn in because my knees go closer together if I don't. So they look like, if I look up, they're a little teensy weensy inward, but that way that my knees, right, don't make that X-leg pattern. So I want to create that support in the back of my pelvis to my hips. And then if you want to find some bold reach with the heels, you know, visualize that your heels are lifting and your feet are now in a relaxed position. Maybe the calves, as the arms open out to cactus, the calves can find a simple stretch. It's not about going too far to the edge of your sensation, but feeling where you're kind of riding it. It's neutral, maybe you take it a little bit more. So then when things get a little stressful, right, you can be calm or pretend. So there's a little space at the knees. And then gradually, if there's some tranquility, right, you can feel that the pack of the pelvis, the whole pelvis packing, is releasing. And it takes a couple more poses until we can do like a hip crossover and get this pelvic backing to spatially open. But it's this sequence of poses. So it's kind of this hip settling. Let your eyes relax. Give a few moments here. And congratulations if you find that you can balance your sandbag and it feels, you know, pretty much a meditation, right? For your circulatory system, for your heart, your blood pressure. This is a great pose for letting that fluid, any of that retention in the legs drain out. And it opens up the respiratory functions, right, as well. You know, if you are capable of letting the knees bend, but feel that the load of the sand in the feet moves a little bit over your heart, so that when you do the bend of the knees, it's like a leg press. So I've got to kind of trust that this leg duo, this leg pair, is kind of approaching my mid body and bending. And it changes the intensity in your lungs, it stretches them out. So breathing while you're doing it would be helpful versus holding your breath. Take deep breaths, feel the ribs move when you breathe. All right, now if you haven't already tossed your sand, this would be a good time. If you're going to play with this one for a bit, you can stay and do some leg presses if you're feeling so strong. But as we move the sand away, we're going to keep those knees centered. I want to use a block for this. So we'll put a block between the knees and a little higher up versus like right in the mid-thigh. So let's concentrate on the knees. And the block is in its most narrow width. Okay, so it's a little bit more comfortable to squeeze in. Now, shift the knees side to side so that you can kind of open up the back, right? You're warming up the back. Because even though we've been movement oriented, it's sometimes very specific angles and the circulation goes in one direction. So now we kind of fluff out the back fluffing. So warming up and spreading the circulation across that back seam. Yeah, kind of think of your body as fabric, right? That you're moving this fabric across. And then once the fibers, the cross fibers spread open in the back, I would delight in this one often if you can. If you do legs up at the wall, it's hard to do this one, but if you do it out in the middle of the room, you have a little more strength work going on for your legs. And then when you come down, you can follow part of the sequence if you want to use some of it, of course. But when the knees go side to side, once you get into center, instead of stopping and like breaking, just let the knees kind of wander a little bit as you move your bolster away from underneath. And you're going to want to have that connection of your feet on top for just a moment here. Okay. Now, even if you're averse to bolster under feet for this version, let's use it for a little bit of time so that you can get up higher on the spine. Okay. So what I want you to take is the belt, and you're going to probably still feel this little arch on your back right now under your back. Like it's enough your hand could slide under. So what I want you to work with is kind of getting that down. So spend some time to feel your back weight, the weight of your spine center. If you tend to have to pull your belly in to get the spine to flatten out, feel some belly breaths and see if it can naturally widen. Give it time. Just be. Now squeezing into the block, if I turn the block to the second setting, so my feet are a little bit farther out, that can make it easier on my back to widen. So, hey, let's do that. Let's change the block so it's the second setting. Don't want anyone to have a backache. And then, now my belt's already in a loop. I wish I could slide it under my feet. Well, I'm going to do that actually. I'll take a gamble. So make the belt a little bit smaller of a loop if you haven't already figured this out. You're going to loop up. Okay. I'm definitely going to take a gamble on this one. So we'll see if I can do it. So I'll bring the belt over my forward under my feet and around my legs, or you can unbuckle it. I just know that it's a pretty loud pop in the sound when we record that. So I'm gonna hold back on making a noise. So you make the belt loop around the legs. It's mid-thigh. So take your time to tighten it. And now that the block is at the second setting, so it's second width, this will make it so that your belt, even if it's twisted, I just want you to make sure you're holding it on the legs. It's pretty toned. Make sure that's tight on the legs. And now when you lift up, you have a spacer for your back. You lift up your hips, and I want you to get your hands so they're reaching down and the palms are open. Now feel if you spread the arms out a little bit. Just kind of feel how your back responds, your shoulders, your spine, and then let your feet kind of shove into the bolster. They are pushing. And then once you have that resistance, you push into the bolster. You're going to guide your spine down and be very clean with each spinal touch, right? Each vertebral touch. So the fibers across the back are actually being pressed down. You're making little imprints, like remember those little leaf imprints you'd make in like fall and classes a long time ago? Leaf prints, spine prints, vertebral prints. Okay, now as you push into your feet, you want to get a feel of kind of a little bit of a easeful lift. So now get into the action of lifting and lowering your spine and working the strength in your hamstrings and your glutes, and also your hip flexors. This is a real hip strengthening shape. Okay, so it is interesting dynamic. This is how you kind of study the strength. So when you lift up, there's only so far you can go. So let's say you decide, well, I really want to train my hips to work with this energy and this tone, because this is a great way to learn pelvis, psoas connection, what connects your spine to your leg, right? It's the psoas, right? So there's all these amazing things, but take a block underneath flat, just go really low with it so it's easy. I have mine kind of pushed up, so it's the base of the block, the line at the base is right around my tailbone, so it's still under my back, the block. And then once I center down, you can decide, do you want your block lower, a little lower, so you're comfortable, but let your bones really settle on that block. So you're just on the block. You don't have to tighten your legs to be here right now. You can just be. Okay. So now get a feeling of this resistance, right? Maybe there's some with the belt and the block. Maybe you feel like you're kind of stuck on this brace, okay? Now we're gonna move the arms, so we'll stretch our arms back overhead if that's possible for your shoulders. And then feel that your head can nod. If you don't like this blanket under your head, move it away. If you're on a carpet, sometimes it's fine without a blanket. And then get a feel of everything kind of gelling into these props that are at the pelvis. And you might lose your block. If you relax enough, it might just drop. And it might stay. So I want you to feel that you are using the belt to hold the legs in this form and the block underneath you. The block between the leg pieces might be less of a focus. Okay, now the feet are hopefully kind of parallelish. Now there is some good stuff going on with talk about should the feet turn out, the legs move a little farther, so the sacroiliac joint is not so compressed. And I don't know if there's a real clear relationship with individual, each person has a different response, I think in general. So what I like to work with though is manifesting that motion in the pelvis. So when you push down to your feet and you lift your hips up off the block, I want you to really work with momentum towards the knees. So trying to lift up, and then move the block away from under you, that one. And then lower your arms forward and down and let the spine settle. Okay. Now we're going to remove the block between the knees of the thighs. And then what we'll do is push the bolster away. Be careful because your legs are blocked with the belt. And the knees can be a little alienated when you try to kick things. So just be mild with it. Get the bolster to the right side of your mat. And then as we lower our feet down, and now you're floored, right? So with your feet and your arch of the back is obvious. Push out into the belt. Now my belt's in the middle of my legs, so I'm gonna pull the knees in and put the belt a little higher, so it's closer to my knees. And then I'm gonna feel that resistance, so I push out a little bit. Hands on the tops of the thighs, and then push your thighs. So you're trying to push the thigh, the actual fibers towards the knees as you lift up the hips. Okay, and maybe you feel a little bit different with your connection to your back muscles when your feet are on a solid ground. Sometimes it's good, even though you can't get as high in the back, it's pretty strong for your spine, strengthening the spine. Okay, now when the arms go down, you're going to reach the hands together, interlace the fingers a little bit, doesn't have to be perfect, but you're going to interlace your fingers so it's more like you interlace and the palms are open. Okay, like that. Now, as I interlace, my shoulders are trying to be down the best they can right now. And keep the lift of the hips and see if you can find a balancing point here that's not as high as you can go, but it's reasonable flow of energy in the hips. Should feel like there's a lot going on in my hips. A lot of circulation. They're super powerful, right? It's your center of gravity as well. But they get a lot of wear and tear from being dragged the way they are, right? From standing on two legs. So working on your back with your, hip lifting is really strengthening for our hips. And it's good for the spine. So release the grip of the fingers, palms open. And then as you lift your heels up, lower the vertebrae and really milk it. So it's one vertebral. Sounds like vertebral. Lowering. And once it lowers down, it could be a little bit of a stomach control. Spine down. Knees. Reach in, hands at the back of the legs to help you out. And then unbuckle. And we'll take Baddha Konasana here. So you bring feet together. I want you to get both blocks up. Put them up at the sides of the hips. And then we got these other props around, knees out, feet together, and I'm kind of guiding my block so it's tilted, holding the side of my leg. And it might feel like you have to kind of really fidget around with your blocks until they support you, but you can really make it work out with that one. So you'll feel the block kind of pulling the skin on the side of the leg just the right amount. And then I've got to kind of get my belly area just to really center and kind of feel the belly bowl. I like to have a blanket a little bit higher under my head than the flat one. So I'll roll my blanket up so it's in that kind of quarter fold under your head, if you haven't already done that. Because you'll realize after you're on your spine for a while, studying it, that now as you reach your hands, interlace your fingers into Usta Hastasana, hands interlace, roots of fingers, and let's carry the arms so they reach back, but slowly, even if you already got back there, then slowly react with your breath. Hip settling 101 today, huh? Yeah, and if you feel like there's still some aches and a little bit of irritability in the back muscles, really feel those knees wide, get them high up on the blocks, the legs, so they're perched up. Okay. If your feet are not completely together, that's okay. Some of us might have our feet up on that bolster, that little, or the blanket you have below. That's kind of a good idea on this one. Didn't bring that to mind till I realized it was there. Okay. Arms go back up, still interlacing at the roots if you haven't released it yet. Come back. And then lower your hands to find if you're using blocks. Slide them out. We're going to take a hip crossover, leg crossover sensation. So do a few motions that might feel soothing to you. It could be alternating knee, but a real flowing knee to chest, so the legs are dynamic, right? The feet don't touch the floor. They're kind of bicycling a little bit. And then I like to have my lower leg on nothing. I don't want to have it on a blanket or anything. So I like to keep kind of that pure downward flow with the thigh on the base. So right leg down. And then left knee is bending. And I've got my bolster now situated besides to the top of the bolster on the right side of the mat is right across from the top of my thigh pretty much. And when I reach over, let's say you're flat on your back and the lumbars are down, okay, you're going to eventually be crossing over up in the ribs too. So once you do lift up that left buttock and you kind of in some way fling the leg to the right, be sure that your back is comfortable with that stretch in your hip. Then you can add the ball if you have that, and then the sandbag to the outer left leg. And I think the sandbag can be really nice on this one, but not required. Some people find that's just a necessary intensity pressure. So balance the positioning of that sand, and you might surprise the circulation by having more of the sand weight on the hip and kind of push it over and shove the sand inside the bag closer to that left side. Depends on the sandbag you have. But let that weight really trickle over. The right leg can bend. Arms can send themselves straight out. Continue to strengthen into that left hip. So your eyes center. So there might be two experiences, one of the musculature and one of the kind of the valve of movement to the breath valves. And the head might really like to turn to the left. You might be surprised that that little piece of movement at the top of the spine affects the circulation in the spine down to the root. I mean, it makes sense. Like if you were to try to get the kinks out of something, like a fabric you were holding, you're going to have to get both sides of it to get that to length to get the kinks out. That's the only thing I can think of. But anyhow, so the same thing goes, even though I think most of us would be in practice, we'll just let our head be in the middle, and that's fine and good enough, but it's kind of the whole experience all the way through the top. Deep breath. Even if it makes you sleepy. Bring the focus to the feeling of hips without necessarily moving them. There is circulation, right, that is occurring the whole time you're in a still position, and maybe even more so because it's advancing the blood flow into this left hip, right? It targets a space. But the key might be for you to really drop in and feel how high up your leg is. Just notice from an inner experience versus a literal looking and taking a picture and seeing if one side is higher than the other. Let's just see if you can feel that, how much you're pulling in the back, across the waist, into the hip. Just kind of scan the feeling. You don't have to stuff the ball in anymore. It might be barely felt. Okay, and then once your head rolls back to center, if it hasn't already, you might roll it the other direction. Feel the weight of your head. Okay, now come back and center and take the sand away. It may have, grown some of the intensity. Maybe it didn't fizzle out. So you want to kind of mark that a little bit. Mark it like it's almost like you're kind of sealing the deal in this left hip. So take a shape where you move anything that's on you or besides you, so you're able to roll into your back, left foot to right knee. And then when you do this pattern, I want you to try to let that left knee swing open, and then feel how you make that imprint into your spine. You center the back. And then as you uncross that left foot down, scoot the feet close towards your seat, like you're lifting your heels up. So you're on your roots of the toes, not tippy toes, but it feels kind of like a tippy toe position. And then lift up the hips. I know this is a lot of hip work, so hip strengthening. If you need to get rid of your blanket, get rid of it. And then let your hands hold the hips like they're helping. They're helping hands. And you get a feel if they can do that at all. Are your muscles in your arms able to hold your hips up when they're like this? Most of us, our muscles in our arms do all this pulling, but this pushing is like, it's a tricky one. To use your body weight as your workout, kind of good time. Let's just pretend it's a good time. Okay, so we're going to lower down. I want you to get your hands so they're reaching around the hip. So it's like this is holding your pelvis, but your thumbs at the back are trying to stretch the back downward. So you're lengthening down. So you're pushing down to center and let the fibers in that space just be pushed down with your thumb. Make a little thumb dent. And then once you put that dent in, you lower your spine. Okay, then let the feet be flat on the ground. If you need to scoot them down, go for it. Get your bolster. And then once you get ready to put it on the other side of your body, to the left side, you kind of decide, where is that hip balance going to be? who knows what is in the way. Okay, bolster on the left side and position so that as the right leg goes in and the left leg goes down, the right leg crosses to the bolster. Now I tend to, you might have one side you really rely on your rolling ability in your spine and your hip. So you want to still reinforce this shoulder, back, chest open. Value that you do that in class too. Value this opening of the chest. It seems so simple after you do class for a while, this ability to keep it open on your back, but it's not easy for entry level practitioners, right? It's just getting their shoulders back is tough on the floor. So celebrate that you're able to do that achievement there. And once you have your sand on your right thigh, or if you decide not to, that's fine. If you feel like your leg needs some more height underneath it on the bolster, put a blanket there. And then stretch open the right limb, and head turning to the right is likely going to be helpful for you. So feel where your arm is open, feel where your head rolls to the right, and circulation is supported by breathing. And if things are a little bit grippy and you're tensed up, and some of this is a lot for the hip or the spine sensations, let's stretch. Breathe, balance the intensity. If it's too much, take a little less of a crossover. If you have the ball at the sacrum and that's pushing too much, then move it away. And inhale, fill the lungs. Shoulders back and down, right side of the chest open. Head turns. That's that little piece of movement for your neck usually. The head is fairly heavy, so let the weight of it roll to the right. Relax the eyes. Give yourself a few moments here. If the weight of the sand, you can feel that particularly settled, right? If it sometimes you want to move it around and see if it brings a little more ease into the back muscles. But this is a pretty interactive sensory experience, right, for our muscle patterns this session. So, get a feel for when you move your sand away. And maybe you're a creature of habit here. So when you slide away, I think that's what we are, creatures of habit. We move the ball, we roll into the back, right foot to left knee. So this to me, right, this exchange of movement is a little bit tense. I have to kind of gradually get my knee open and just be, and just let it settle. So interestingly enough, the connection from that left side of the spine into the left side of the pelvis and the leg, I want you to seal that as much as you can, like you're sealing the back into the floor, making that imprint. But imprint with breath. So you're not like imprinting and holding your breath, stiffening up. You're breathing so there's some fluidity and some normality to the experience. Whatever that means, normality to the experience. Sounds abnormal. Take a moment here. We're going to get ready to come up to all fours. So I want you to get a feel of that knee open, because we are going to get upwards. And then when you pattern the movement of the leg taking away from that knee, the feet down, feel when you kind of pattern your feet to lift up and lift down. So alternate lifting the feet. lifting knee up. So it's not pulling the knee all the way to the chest, but it's just alternating, kind of marching. That's what I'm looking for. Not patter, but marching. Puttering. Okay. So when we get symmetrical, right, this is where we're aiming. So we're going to bring the knees in. And I like it if you could try to roll up this way. So you're going to try to go from back to sitting, but you could be in a cannonball shape. You can hold the back of the legs and swing up. Okay. And that way you're kind of in this full piece of equipment, full body. And then we'll pull in a blankie and we'll take a seat and we'll move our knees, our feet back. Maybe not our knees back, but we'll put them under us. So we've been on back with our knees, up for a good hour, really. We've been in that shape, believe it or not, happens. So let's get some space here for this the front range. So we got our knees wide on the blanket, and now you got the option to have them in this different spacing, right? Your feet, you could be pretty centered out like frog pose and still get some nice back work, but we're going to be kind of safe on the knees. So stand out your hands, round your back into cat, and arch the spine. So simply alternate flexing and the word is extending, right? Flexion and extension. So I mentally think of when I think flexion in my body spaces, they're both reaching positions for part of the body. They're trying to get as much space there, opening the back, but then you're trying to open up the front when you arch. Okay, so you start to take your own pattern. So you're going to reach back with your hips, and then when you come forward to up dog, have your hands out wide, but this might be too much on the wrist to have the hands farther back. So you might have to move your hands a teeny bit forward to have a little more support in your wrist, and then come back to your version of reaching the hips back. So it doesn't have to be detailed as child's pose. Kind of like puppy pose, isn't it? And then move the hips forwards. I mean, you can find that bridge pose patterns, and this is pretty much the same range. It's like you think, I could go farther, but this part you can probably go farther than you do in bridge because you can let your front spine really reach and get more range, right? Like being on all fours. Okay, now play with it. Hands slide back, toes under, lift the knees up in a few moments, get to down dog. And that might mean that to get there, you have to alternate bending your knees. I know the calves might still need some stretch, huh? Even though they had a good amount, when they get in that inverted state and then back into the bipedal state, right? You're going to feel that association of the heels reaching down, and try stepping your feet together. Just get a feel if your feet can go towards, well, they're touching, big toes are touching. And then as you lift up the right leg, lift it up behind you and feel that coordination of balance in your upper bones, in your shoulders, trying to spread them apart still. But this is a little more strengthening in the upper body. And then lower down that right foot. Now you might need to bend the knee greatly to get the toes, the ball, then the heel, and then switch the leg lifting. So try to find that you're right in the center line. Like you want to feel that you're centering from the spine to lift the left leg up so that you are working on that core. Now let's not worry how high we kick the leg, but if you feel like you want to like kick the leg as high as possible, you can manage that, go for that experience. But sometimes when you come back down, you might feel, oh, it takes a little bit further to get my hips level. So bring the feet about hips distance apart and settle the knees. So you settle the arms forward, reach on front. I want you to bring the knees far out knees, far out apart, and then come back to child's pose. Now, this is a lot of crease for me in my knees. I can bring my hands in, this is okay in my upper, but I prefer a bolster. And I just lift it up on the very edge of that blanket. I'm gonna set it up so I get some success here. And then get my other blankie and just kind of wad it up the back of my legs. I don't need it to look a certain way, but wad it up and then settle back. This might be a nice spread in your back. Kind of feels like, oh, back is helped out here. And if that gravitational flow of moving your back to the open is a bit of a challenge because of the knees, you can also be here. Let's say your knees don't appreciate that. Then, well, be sure the bolster's enough under you, actually. This will be your version, okay? And you can put a stack of hands, yours, or you can let your chin be right on the edge of the bolster and it works out okay, so that the back is open. Okay, so take the pose of choice there. Either one, this is okay. This is okay to be close, face down. Well, you're all face downwards, but you can have the full core on the bolster too. Okay, or you can have the child's pose. So take a few more moments. If you're a child poser and your head is turned to one side, you want to turn it to the other side. So get that neck to appreciate movement. Okay, spreading out through that back seam, these fibers, these cross fibers in the low back, out to the wedge of the pelvis. You want to kind of visualize that area can soften in the low back frame. It's been working a lot of hip strength work here today in this back. And about to get a little more in the legs in a moment, but fine tune the head turning. Now, once we start to come up, we're going to do a lift back with the hips so we can go into a forward fold. Okay, so when you are lifting up here, or if you're on a full prone position, you're going to come up and then stretch the knees, well, the hips up behind you, and walk on back to your forward fold. Now, I want to do these patterns before we do side stage today, so we're kind of all, shuffling out everything. So the toes, well, feet are about parallel as they can be, and the spine kind of rustles down. It wrestles out of the pelvis here, even though you don't feel like it's wrestling. It certainly is using gravity to sense the directional release. So you might prop up your bolster so you can put your hands on it. And some of us might want to bend the knees a little bit, lift the bolster, and then kind of sink our hands into that bolster tipped up. That can be kind of nice to do a little bit. But get something out of your forward bend, even if it's to bend your knees and to let your brain completely, well, I don't know if it drains out. The contents might still be in there, but let go of something. And then hold on to your elbows, or hold onto the backs of the legs, or let the arms dangle. Remember, the very top of the spine is sensitive to the brain stem. So if we can let the head relax. That might mean giving your face, surrendering, just letting the face go, the facial muscles. You can feel the blood flow, the skin cells in the face certainly wake up. Okay, now as you bend through the knees and we slide the hands back on forward, walk on front to the sides of the bolster, lower down. So we're all going to meet in Sphinx pose. So my bolster is under the core, straight forward. Lower down, so the elbows are down. And as the arms are centering downwards, the shoulders are going to shift back. Okay. Or cat loaf position. So when the elbows are down, can you get a feel of your hands open? And I don't know if you can sense your shoulders even able to move back in this position, but you certainly have to find the propping of your shoulder above your elbow. And so this is a fun one, I think. It's not super fun, but is to really anchor the circulation in the spine sides, like the fibers on the sides of the spine, feeling their natural arch. And the final spinal here is going to be just setting ourselves up for side sage coming up here. So feel this. Now, if your neck is like extra tone, you're feeling a tone tension, then let your head tip a little bit. Okay, feel the breath in the ribs in the front into the bolster. And try to let your ribs push the bolster underneath you. And now let the feet stay pretty passive. And as I slide the hands back and bring your hands so they're under the shoulder as much as you think they are. I mean, they don't have to be lined up specific, but you can feel the fingers open. You can feel the toes under. Chin tucks, lift up chest. Feel this arch. This is a pretty easy going up dog because our knees are down. But I want you to sense that there's this arch manifesting. It's an arch manifesto here. So we feel that arch, we feel the back muscles kind of move themselves into the ribs. I mean, they're all related, but the back of the ribs, the psoas activating. Okay, now as you come back, we're going to shift our props around. So turn the bolster across so it's horizontal underneath you, straight across. And then we'll move our blanket on the other side to the front, right? So this is to where your hands were before. Then your other blanket. You can make it so that it's a quarter fold. If you know you like a little more height in your side sage, you're going to lean to your right hip or your left hip. It doesn't matter today which side you want to start on. Whatever side is fine. Go to one side. Now, if you have a ball and you like to put that on the inside of the leg, then take the ball to the inside of the left leg, and then a block goes overhead. A sandbag might be a part of this position on your left side, and enjoy how you get the sand on. You're on your own to get your sand, so just figure it out. How does this be helpful? Maybe it's we had it on the hip before, some of us did, so get a feel where it's on the side, and then when that left arm goes over, you let your head release. So it might not tilt, it might be that you're on the back corner of your brain. And so enjoy just being very individual about your pose. Personalize it. So that might mean movement with your left arm. It's nice to kind of wrestle with the places that are feeling still a little dormant at this part of your practice. Like there's probably something. It might even be that you realize that you're not sure if you were focusing on your breath or if it was even part of your plan. So this can be a time to get those interactions with the ribs and the intercostals. A great name for a muscle between a rib, intercostal. So I'm kind of letting my hips just be really heavy, and I feel like I'm rolling a little bit on my back, but it feels great in the side. So let your emphasis be this side vent. It's like you've got vents in your side. Open up your vents. Let that air move in, kind of let it be heated. And if your head is kind of challenged with where it should tilt, maybe you even tilt on the back of it a little bit. You don't try to force it to the right or whichever direction you're in. You just feel around. There might be a little bit of waist pinching on this. So you don't want to keep that part of your pot, right? Your core to be pinched up. So in between sides, I want you to have this kind of awareness that you can either do cat-cow, if that feels like that will loosen up and get the fabrics to be warm in the middle, the body fabric. Or maybe you like a horizontal chest opener, and that can be really nice too. So when you are ready to shift out, you can either let your body roll into the back and knees bending and let the brain rest on the blankets. Arms are between the bolster and the blankets, right? So you have this perfect wedge to open up the chest, right? To get a feel of this balance in these fibers. And if you decide, nope, I'm going to do cat-cow, then instead of being here on the back, you moved into table. If your knees are okay with that, and you're moving the spine, and it likely can find its way to loosening up on its own pace, but getting a connection between your movement and your breath. Even if it's repetitious, right? So getting that alternating exploration of cycling the fibers to reach and repeat. Okay, then find that second side stage. So when you're ready, come to the other side, whether your hands and knees or your back, and you're going to roll to that left hip. But when you lengthen, you can be really specific on getting this side vent to open, right? I mean, there's a lot of ladder. There's a whole ladder in this side with the ribs. So if I lean and I kind of push down, I want to find that I'm kind of rolling into the side, a little bit of the back side, not like pushing straight down like this, like I'm turning towards a table pose, but I'm actually trying to kind of riff on the ribs a little bit. It's like you're playing your body like an instrument. I mean, that's kind of the bottom, the base plan here is to really get some fluidity. So, and some days you're a little rusty, and some days you can really polish the movement. So play with some of them that work well, and the others you're still trying to figure out how to be inside this skin. And as the fibers move, you can put sand on the side, you can put a ball on the inside of that lower leg. And if the block overhead facilitates grounding, use it. Yeah, so I like to use the block, but I can see a reason not to. It's just that it's a lot of stretch for the armpit chest. So if this area you get a lot of numbness by trying to push this, then you can either pass on this version with the arm up, right? You can have it open, you can have it down the side. You could be on the back of your head. There's been so much pulling through the respiratory cycle right now that you want to find where you can comfortably breathe and settle the hips. Heavy center of gravity. Breathing deep. Okay, so with that reach of the side layer, the expansion, feel if the direction of the middle body can shift over to the side. So you're leaning into the bolster. And then once you start to shift any of the sand away, and then your body leaning, I want you to turn towards the blankets. Turn the bolster so it's up. I know you might be turning the other direction in your practice, but your bolster's tipped up on your blankets. And you're sitting right in front of your bolster on the ground space, not on the bolster, but in the front. And you'll get your blocks, you get a belt, and you'll take Supta Baddha Konasana. So find the belt primarily, that's the big piece of this one. And I would buckle up. You don't have to do Baddha Konasana with a clasp, but it's a nice piece for your seams to feel like they're kind of held together. And it is calming to have the belt, even though it seems like it's prying you. This pulling and tightening and something pushing in is calming to the nervous system. So we take a big loop. Overhead, you've got your belt loop, right? You put it overhead around your hips and then around your waist. And then make sure that the buckle is in a space that you can get a hold of if you need to get out. But also when you lower the belt to the back rung of the hip, you're going to slide in your blocks under the legs. And then once the blocks are wedged, I'm going to put mine at the second height and just put it under my knee space to open up the knees. And then as I lower down the spine, now we have the full support. Okay. So kind of avoid trying to push your pelvis up, like force the hips up out of the legs. See if you can let the legs settle down. Sorry, not the legs. The hips settle down as a basin. So it's like your pelvic basin here. And the legs are they just kind of lift up out of that root, the pelvic kind of basin. It's like the pot, right? And then they kind of grow out. They're the growths. One might be longer than the other, who knows? What got more nourishment. And sand is an option at the core. You can put it from the heart to the belly or across and come into the final pose today, Supta Baddha Konasana, reclining bound angle. And as the shoulders center back, you might get a sense of how can I get my head to feel comfortable. Maybe it's not about more props. Maybe it's about the exact location of the touch of the back of the skull on the bolster. Maybe you have your own bit of shifting. And then as you feel that inner breath as it pushes against the skin, and feel that circulational pulse at the lower rib cage to the belly. So from the diaphragm movement, inhale, belly fills. As you exhale, belly relaxes towards the spine. Try to let the shoulders kind of disengage from trying so that you're using the props to hold you up and feel a little bit of buoyancy for a few more moments. Props supporting, eyes resting back in their perfect portals back into the brain. So if the eyes can rest in their portals, right? They're set in the skull. And feeling that connection, that brain pushes into the eyes and just letting the eyes relax. Breathe in for 4. Breathe out for 5 to 6. Now returning to the awareness of movement. Feel where the shoulders are still centered back. But even if you move the sand away, right, there's kind of a fluttering of shift in the balance. So try to move any weight on the core body off. And then noticing if you can respond to being balanced again in the chest with the arms back and down. And if this feels like a nice connection right now to end your session with, to be reclining, heart open, this might be right where you complete the session's work, is here. And then some of us might like the dutiful action of coming back to a seated shape. But we really start class just like that, seated. We start usually posed. So keep in mind you have choices here. So if you decide to come out of the leg position, you can unbuckle now. Those that want to stay for the last minute or so, stay. And as you take that belt gradually away, you'll bring your knees to point up. And you'll walk the feet in, and you might guide your block a little bit away so you don't roll onto one, but roll to the side and let your hands bring you up and take a seat, crossing the legs. You might be seated on the very edge of your bolster, so they're positioned nicely there. And as the legs have a little bit of a crossing, let the spine shape out of the back of the pelvis in its natural arch. Right, kind of comes out of the pelvis and it's arched and sweeping up into the ribs. Lift up the hands and feel that presence of the palms. And as they press and create that heat sensor, bow into the heart. And feeling the presence of this practice, these teachings from many that come to this experience together. Breathing in wellness to yourself, to others in the class, and outwards. And exhale, bowing into your heart. In gratitude, namaste.